for homeschool families that are maybe on the fence about getting active in legislation. Our legislators, they're busy people, but they are just that. They're people. They are people that are curious. They love relationships with other people, and ultimately they need Christ just as much as you and I. They are constantly telling us how much they enjoy visits from the families that come to Capitol Day. You'll be taking an active role in protecting the freedom that you use every single day.
Welcome to CHEA's California Homeschool Podcast, where we equip and encourage California's homeschooling families. I'm Angela Lasch, and today we're diving into a critical conversation about protecting homeschool freedom in our state. If you're a homeschooling parent in California, you need to understand the legislative landscape that affects your right to home educate your children. Joining me is Nathan Pierce, Executive Director of Family Protection Ministries. For over 20 years, Nathan has been on the front lines of California's legislative battles, monitoring hundreds of bills each year and working tirelessly to defend parental rights and homeschool freedom. He and his team have successfully defeated numerous threats to homeschooling through strategic advocacy and relationship building at the state capitol. In this episode, we're talking about Nathan's journey in advocacy, Family Protection Ministries' work in California, how FPM and CHEA partner together to protect our families, and what you need to know as California's legislative session begins in January. We'll also discuss the upcoming Capitol Day event and how you can get involved as a homeschool defender. Whether you're new to homeschooling or you've been on this journey for years, this conversation will give you insight into why advocacy matters and what you can do to protect the freedoms we cherish. Hello, Nathan. Welcome to the podcast. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Glad to have this opportunity. Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, me too. I'm glad it finally worked out. Well, I have, as we just mentioned, a lot of questions for you. So we are just going to jump right in so we can get this information to the people that are listening today. So let's just start with Family Protection Ministries. You've been there for over 20 years. So tell us, how did you get into this advocacy work, and what really just sparked your passion for wanting to protect homeschool freedom?
Sure. So there's different ways to tell the story, but I will just say I remember from a very early age being a part of Family Protection Ministries, to some degree handing out FPM newsletters at park days when I was about 5 years old. So at our local homeschool group, that was when we lived in in San Diego. So my family was involved as I was growing up. So in a way, I was born into it, you could say. But I grew up being homeschooled, and I grew up in a family that was involved in homeschooling, both in our local community as well as with CHEA throughout the state at conventions and different things. But also my mom was the editor for Family Protection Ministries. So we were definitely in connection with FPM and Roy Hansen, the founder of Family Protection Ministries. Later on, when I was in high school, some of our homeschool assignments for English were editing FPM newsletters and documents. So we got some experience that sort of helped pave the way for the work I'm doing now. But also when I went to school, when I went to master's college after high school, my roommate my first year was Roy Hansen's son, Mark, who we had known each other growing up. And so that kind of paved the way to my first internship at FPM. I was sort of recruited into that my first semester of college. So after that, I never left and transitioned into full-time about the time that I got married in 2004 to my wife, Betsy, who I also met at Masters. And so we've both been a part of FPM ever since.
That is an amazing story. So it was almost like you didn't have a choice. Since you were 5 years old, you have been doing something with Family Protection Ministries.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for growing up in a community and really having a passion for that community to thrive, because I have a lot of friends in the homeschool community, and a lot of them I've known for a very long time. So there's a certain element of it that I'm passionate about the community itself, but it really is the principles that we care about in the homeschool community that keep me going, and that's really why I stayed at FPM. I mean, there's other things I could have done, but and there's other things that can be done and need to be done to encourage the homeschool community as well. But I found this work something that I think God prepared me to do, and it's something that I feel I'm able to make a difference in. And so I think the battle for homeschool freedom is something that's worth investing a lot in, and so that's where my heart is, because of the principles of protecting the freedom of parents to make their own decisions for their kids. And that's why I'm here. That's why FPM is here. And so it worked out well that I found a place that I can pursue the principles that I care about a lot.
I love that. That's amazing. Now, you grew up homeschooling, so this has really always been part of your life. But can you tell us really just the history of homeschooling in California? I just don't think a lot of people know. Some people that homeschool now think, oh, we've always been able to homeschool. It's always been like this. But
Sure.
We know it hasn't always been like this. So just briefly,
Yeah.
how did that all come to be?
Right. And with the modern homeschool movement being as old as it is now, it seems like it's hard to picture what the world was like before it was this big. If you looked back into the early 80s or even back into the 70s or 60s, there were people that were homeschooling, but there sure weren't very many, and they probably didn't know anyone else was doing it. In most cases, they were sort of hiding out and schooling their kids because of some principal issue, or perhaps there was some other problem where they couldn't get to a school, or there was some other situation that caused them to need the homeschool option. And so it cost them a lot, because there weren't the opportunities that we have now. There weren't the resources that we have now that homeschooling families have access to. It was very difficult to find resources, especially if you were trying to be secretive about it. So, and a number of families got in trouble for doing that, both here in California and across the nation, going to court. And some of those cases were fought by some of the HSLDA founders, including Mike Smith and Mike Ferris. And Mike Smith, who was actually from California and practiced law in Southern California, he was an attorney, worked on a couple of different types of cases before he started helping homeschooling families in the late 70s, early 80s. He found that there was sort of an increasing desire to homeschool in California, and a lot of that was driven by sort of the same principles, same issues, and same people that were driving the same level of interest across the country. And one of the main things that started, as you know, that kind of gave birth to people involved with CHEA's early days, as well as Family Protection Ministries and HSLDA, was Jim Dobson and his radio program. He had a series on parents involved in their kids' education, kids not starting school too early, Dr. Moore's books, Better Late Than Early, Too Much Too Soon, things that were sort of helping people think through more carefully, rushing kids into an institutionalized education at too young of an age, to the point where they're not ready for this level of structure and being away from mom and dad and having to sort of fit into this new system somewhere, and forced to learn at a pace preset by somebody somewhere that maybe they didn't fit in with very well. And that's the case with a lot of young kids. And so that series of radio broadcasts by Dobson and Raymond Moore and others in the early 80s, 82, 83, somewhere in there, led to a number of families really taking a look at, well, either what are we going to do with our kids, or maybe their kids were already in a school somewhere, which was the case with Mike Smith, and it was not going well. So they realized that they needed to do something different, and there was discussion about this homeschooling thing, and they didn't know what that really was, or what it looked like, or what it could look like, or how some people were doing it, but they knew that they had to do something different. And there weren't the same types of other programs that there are today. Like we have in California today, and really across the country, there's a number of government programs, public school programs that have some sort of a home-based learning element to them. And that wasn't really a thing back in the early 80s. Those kind of developed toward the end of the 80s and into the 90s. They were introduced in law before that, but they weren't really used that much. In California, we actually had some laws introduced in the 70s specifically to help actors, child actors, to be able to learn on set while they're filming movies and TV shows. And so those laws were on the books, but that's really all they were used for, was the child actor industry and maybe a few others. But they certainly weren't widespread, and they weren't used for kids in an average home environment. So as time went on, more people became aware of this, and parents with biblical convictions about raising their children to glorify God, that set of principles driving parents to look for other options for education, coming out, and those same people finding out about these other laws kind of hit the ground running kind of all at once when the Dobson programs were on air, and that all sort of just came together at the right moment, because there were parents all over that were hearing this information, and they were sort of prepped by, I think, the Holy Spirit to be ready to hear it. And so in the early 80s, a bunch of parents that had convictions, not all of them Christian, but a lot of them Christian, decided that they needed to try something different. They launched out into this world of homeschooling. Mike Smith started defending families early on in the early 80s, mid 80s. And really, it kind of took off, and more added to that. Almost immediately there was growth. And some of the early events where homeschoolers got together were bigger than you would think from this brand new movement, with families from all over getting together and saying, hey, we need support. There was definitely a drive to get that support, because they were loners. They knew they were doing something different, and they wanted to be with anybody else that could be doing it. And they realized very quickly that, well, now I'm doing this, so I guess I'm the expert, because nobody else knows anything. I mean, I've done it a day longer than my neighbor, so that makes me the the expert. So after that, it sort of snowballed, I guess, into more and more families joining in to homeschool throughout the state. And early on, in terms of Family Protection Ministries' existence, there was a law that was proposed in the mid 80s, 86, that actually would have said to all these homeschool parents, we're not going to do this anymore in California. It was a man who was an assemblyman, Johann Clays, here in California, who said, this homeschool thing is not intended to be allowed here in our state. And so we need to make sure that it gets clarified. This is banned in our state. We should not be allowing this. And parents that do it are going to go to jail. We just can't have this happening. And so his bill actually had jail time in the bill. It had specifically homeschooling was banned, but also small private schools. You couldn't have a private school with less than 12 students. And if you tried it, that was jail time as well. So that bill was proposed in the mid 80s, and that was one of the early battles for homeschool freedom in California, because in addition to the court cases that had already taken place, a lot of those were won on technicalities. The people didn't show up. The attorneys for the other side didn't show up in court. So, okay, we win. That's not a very satisfying win for the community as a whole. So it was better when we saw this bill actually get pulled by Mr. Clays after a lot of behind the scenes discussions with leaders in the homeschool community, really saying, hey, homeschooling is working for our family and for a number of other families. Here's how it works. Kids are doing well. They're being taught academics, and their parents really care about their education. So this is not a good bill. And he pulled the bill before it went to a committee hearing. So that was sort of an early on victory, but it also was sort of a signal to the homeschool community that, hey, we can do this in California. And so that was kind of an early on thing, but it was still something that you didn't really advertise. Hey, we homeschool. I mean, even me, you mentioned I grew up homeschooled, and we definitely told people that we private school in California. We didn't say we homeschool because we were all concerned that we would be found out, that maybe we would have visits from social workers saying, hey, it's illegal because it's not really recognized in California. Private schooling is recognized in California under the private school law, but there were no court cases yet. In fact, it took a long time for court cases to acknowledge that homeschooling could work under the private school exemption. So it was a little bit of a scary time. We had, drills where you would practice hiding under the bed or climbing out the back window if a social worker came to the door. And that was really necessary back then. There were families that did have their children strip searched, taken away. There were a lot of challenges back in those days, and HSLDA was involved early on to defend those families. But in some cases, it was really traumatic for families. Even if they won in court eventually, that's not something you really want to go through. And so these homeschool families really were the trailblazers, if you will, for the movement that was young, and many people felt that it should not exist. And we had a lot of people that didn't like what homeschool families were doing. So even in the local public schools, we had teachers and administrators that thought that it was their job to make sure that every kid was in school, and that if those people that were trying to homeschool were in their district, boy, they were going to go after them and say, hey, you either have to have your kid in school, or I'm going to go over your curriculum and decide whether it's okay or not. We had that all over the state, and there were just constant challenges. Once we kind of got past that initial bill, though, in the late 80s, we saw a little bit of another victory, where we had a piece of code got introduced in the 90s. And that was in response to the Montoya Act, which was a bill that required that every person working for or volunteering for a public school, or any school in California, had to be background checked and fingerprinted. That would have required everybody that was functioning as a private school to be background checked, including families that were homeschooling and using the private school exemption. So we had that bill go through, and they were rushing it through. They didn't want to take any amendments because it was an emergency, and it was very politically driven, very news driven. And so that once that passed, the author worked with us to add another code section to exempt specifically parents working with their own children exclusively. So that was the homeschool concept. And when that got in the code, everybody breathed a little bit easier, because then there was something. in the code, acknowledging that homeschooling is a thing, parents teaching their own kids at home. And once that was in the code, not really very many people knew about it still. So it was there, but it was sort of just not really paid much attention to until about 10 years after that, when there was a court decision in 2008 that said parents can't teach their kids at home. That's illegal unless you're a certified teacher. And then they reheard the case. That's another story. But that whole case is really important to homeschool freedom in California and across the nation, because it acknowledged that code section that went into the code acknowledging parents teaching their own kids at home, and they were exempted from the background checks. Parents teaching their own kids at home was a thing, and that the legislature acknowledged that it's a thing. And so the court reversed their decision in 2008, recognizing, oh, this is in the code, we missed it. And we recognize that homeschooling is a species of private school in California. And so that's kind of been a huge milestone for homeschool freedom in terms of the legality of it and our ability to continue on. I mean, we always have challenges, continued threats over the years, but in terms of the legality of homeschooling, there was just a lot of confusion and a lot of anxiety, I guess, over were we going to be arrested, or when was the next shoe going to drop. Through the 80s and 90s, it was a stressful time to be a homeschooler, but in a sense, it was also a tight-knit homeschool community in a lot of ways too, because I don't think we have quite the same level of camaraderie in the homeschool community that we did back in the 80s and 90s, at least to the extent that we're in this together, knowing that we could be in trouble at any given moment. So we're rebels together, or whatever you want to call it. It seems like today we don't have quite the same mindset.
Wow, that was all such important information. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I'm sure most people listening, maybe they'd heard one or two of what, the facts that you shared, but just hearing you go through the timeline. And I just think seeing God's hand, like every step of the way, is such a miracle. I'm always talking to people and they say, oh, California, it's terrible to homeschool in California. I'm like, absolutely. Actually, no, it is a miracle that it is such a great state to homeschool in. And thank you, because we know it has to do with all the people that fought so hard in the 80s and 90s and even now. So here we are 40 years later, over 40 years later. So what are you doing now? What is Family Protection Ministries? What does a typical year look like for you? Because, I mean, it sounds like everything's great now, right? Everybody's homeschooling. It's legal.
Right.
Nobody's going to jail. So what do you do all day long, Nathan?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, so the legislature in California stays busy most of the year round. And by that, I mean, they have a session that goes from January through, August, September. And then it's a 2-year session, but those are the months that they're actively working on passing legislation through the known legislative cycle. And so January, February, they're introducing a lot of bills, and we have about 3,000 bills introduced every year here in California. So that's kind of the mad rush of introduced legislation that we're trying to go through and figure out, okay, what do all these bills mean? What do they say? What are they talking about? But what does it mean when you actually analyze them and look through seeing how they work together with current law? What does that impact? What are the different areas it's going to affect? How does it affect families? How does it affect parental rights and their, obligations and relationship with their children? How does it impact education? And sometimes a lot of those things aren't evident when you first read a bill. So we do a lot of filtering legislation using electronic filtering services. and that helps us, but we can't really get a better feel for what it's talking about until we really get into a more in-depth analysis and figure out, okay, what is this actually going to do? How does it work with current law to enforce whatever they're doing, or what are the details going to look like? So then ultimately we figure out, okay, what is our position and how are we going to influence these legislators? Are we going to we usually start out with just meeting with the staffer in the author's office that's handling the bill and try to figure out, well, what's the goal here, and then ultimately figuring out, if we have to, we'll send out action alerts, getting people involved. If we need to get people lined up to testify in committee, and then people either showing up at the Capitol, visiting their local legislators, making phone calls. All of those things are tools that we use to try to win victories on pieces of legislation. But most of the time it's behind the scenes. And that kind of goes through from March, April, May, June, sometimes later in the year, depending on how stubborn a piece of legislation is being. But I look at every stop along the legislative cycle as an opportunity for a bad bill to die. And I know that sounds morbid, but it's kind of important for our understanding and victories in legislation. And homeschool freedom is important. So we have to really understand when our opportunities are to have victories. And everything that a bill does, it has to overcome hurdles, whether it's a deadline, whether it's a technicality on an analysis, whether it's a budget that it has to meet, whether it's a vote, which there's a number of votes. So every one of those is on the list. But there's all these hurdles along the way for a piece of legislation, and every one of those is an opportunity for that bill to not make it past the hurdle, which in most cases, in my opinion, is a good thing when a bill does not make it over one of those hurdles. Now, there are good bills. I will give you that. There are good bills every year, in fact, but they are few and far between. So of those 3,000 bills, I don't support a whole lot of them every year. So that means that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of research, analyzing, and trying to strategize on how to defeat a piece of legislation. Towards the end of the summer, the governor will be vetoing or signing legislation. That's another one of these hurdles. And then ultimately, the legislators go home, but they never really go home. They work out of their district offices, and I do get calls during their off season from legislators or staffers working on bill ideas. And a few years ago, I was really going to take a break between Christmas and New Year's, and I had plans, and I got calls from 3 different legislators' offices about testing for homeschoolers and a couple of other things. And so I was definitely working that week. And as we worked through, okay, why is this not a good idea? Okay, how can we fix this one to be less bad? And some of them are well-meaning. Some of them are not all about getting control of homeschoolers. Some of them are actually ideas that I could say, oh, that's so generous or so helpful, or something along those lines. But ultimately, it ends up being problematic. And so, one example from this last year, earlier this year, in fact, was a legislator that wanted to address the issue of sexually violent predators being released near homeschool families. And this is kind of an ongoing issue. We've had a number of bills to try to address this problem, but ultimately, in this particular case, the idea was, well, let's just publish all the addresses, and then everybody knows where everybody lives. And the whole idea is to say to sexually violent predators, you have to stay away from these addresses by law. Well, there's other things they're supposed to do by law too, and obviously they haven't done them. So that's why they have this label. And so there's some concerns there. And so we have to think about what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and how do we solve that without causing new problems or problems for somebody else. And so this is what we deal with a lot at FPM, is trying to understand a problem, a concern that somebody has, and trying to come up with a solution for them. It ultimately means we rewrite people's bills for them all the time. Something that it's not like it's our issue. We're just trying to fix their issue so they don't cause us harm. And that's a majority of what we do. This year we had another bill that dealt with student ID cards for private homeschoolers. It was for every student in California, and it was putting a hotline on the student ID cards for the Trevor Project, which is it's an advocacy organization that teaches stuff that's not consistent with the Bible in terms of gender and family and things like that. And they wanted students to have ready access to that phone number and the online chat rooms and things like that. And this was a big concern to us. And so we worked with them to get that language changed so that it didn't affect students in private schools or private homeschools. And so in that case, it's an issue of writing some more it's simpler language. It's simple language, but then it's might be more challenging to get it into the bill by getting certain people to go for it. In this particular case, this year, God was really gracious, and the language was simple, and getting it in the bill was not too hard. Now, the author says he wants to still get us back in there, but for now, God has his hand on that, and we have a reprieve from that right now. But there have been other cases where not only has it been challenging to get our way, so to speak, but the language has also been difficult. A few years ago, we had a bill where it wasn't banning homeschooling. It wasn't saying parents can't teach their kids. And it wasn't saying something like you have to use state curriculum or have teacher certifications. It was actually a bill dealing with gun safety laws, which I'm not against gun safety, but the way that this bill was written, it was rewriting the authority structure of private education in the state of California from the ground up, which is bizarre when you think about it. It was gun safety. What does that have anything to do with private school law? But it was essentially rewriting who reports to who in terms of all of private education in order to make sure that every kid that attends a private school gets this one-page handout on gun safety. Now, I'm not against gun safety. I think a one-page handout on gun safety isn't a bad thing for people to see. But in this particular case, they were rewriting who reports to who in all of private education, which would have changed things like who can say your curriculum isn't adequate, and who can say that this family is not a good candidate for homeschooling. It would have changed all of those things. And so in that case, we rewrote their bill for them 4 times in order to help them come up with a way to achieve their goal of getting gun safety information out to the general public without damaging the homeschool freedom that we have in California. So there's always something that comes up that causes our freedom to go into jeopardy again. And so there's always something for us to do. It's not always going to be as clear cut as a homeschool ban. And it's not always going to be, teacher certifications, but there's a lot of smaller things that show up on a regular basis. Now, we did have teacher certifications and curriculum standards and testing come up again in 2018. And I remember you were there for the hearing on that one at the state capitol. There were a whole bunch of families. And that is where you kind of see a little bit of that camaraderie coming back that we had seen in previous years. There aren't very many events that have happened in the last 10 years where you had that many homeschoolers all in one place. I mean, if you think about it, we used to have that at homeschool conferences back even in the mid 90s. You would have, thousands of homeschool folks showing up in one place at homeschool conferences. But now I guess it takes a piece of legislation for everybody to come out and say, hey, this is no good. And that's good that they care to do that, because that's a big part of why our freedoms are what they are today. So I think that's something to say for all the homeschool families out there. They care about their homeschool freedom. They care that the parents are the ones that God gave children to and that are responsible for their upbringing. So they take that responsibility, that obligation seriously. And I think that there's an important lesson there.
Wow. So you have taken us through the history, some really important court cases. We've definitely seen God's hand on private home education. You took us through a year in the life of Family Protection Ministries, somewhat. But now, so here we are going to be going into 2026. What do you see for this coming year? Or even, you're talking about the camaraderie of homeschoolers. Even when you think of organizations like FPM and CHEA, working together, what do you see for this coming year in 2026?
Definitely, there's a need to be vigilant for our freedoms still. We're not off the hook there. It's definitely something that we have to be aware of. And I think there's a couple of things that I expect to come up this year in terms of legislation. But there's always something that could come up. There's always surprises too, in terms of legislation, of things that I didn't expect or see coming that do show up each year. So I'll just mention sort of three general things, and then we could maybe talk about some specifics. But I think in general, we can expect that the legislature will introduce bad bills. There are going to be 3,000-ish bills showing up in January or February, and there will be a considerable number of bills that regulate our way of life here in California, and some of those will have some kind of an impact on parental rights and homeschool freedom. That's the experience of the last 40 years of FPM and CHEA working on legislative stuff dealing with homeschooling and the family that speaks to that. So we will see some of that. And we can also expect some people to speak up. Now, the question is how many people that will speak up. I think that's an important thing to be aware of, that there is going to be a need. And so anticipating that there's going to be a need, prepare to be ready to respond when that need becomes clear what it is. So we definitely are going to need people to speak up on legislation. And by that, I mean, we may need phone calls or letters to go in. We may need people to visit legislators' district offices. And we always encourage people to visit their legislators at the district office, just as a friendly get to know you visit, say hi, thank them for serving, and not really have anything legislative to talk about. That's always good. If you are able to do that, that's a huge help to homeschool freedom in the long run. But in terms of outcomes, ultimately, we know there's legislation coming. We know we need to get involved, but ultimately, we know that God's going to show up, and we know that He's always there, and He cares about our freedom. And if we look at history, we've seen God's hand on homeschool freedom over the years in a big, big way. And homeschooling has a lot of freedom in California, and we have homeschool freedom across the nation. And so God's going to do what He wants to do, and we need to get involved in what our part is in maintaining that freedom. But I think that we do have to recognize that no matter what happens with legislation, whether it's in California or elsewhere, and even around the world, and we see challenges to God's people in whatever they're doing, and we know that there's always going to be a right way to move forward. There's always going to be the thing that God wants us to do in whatever situation that we're in, no matter what the laws look like. There's always going to be a way to be obedient to God. And Most cases, that's even a legal option. In some countries, it's not right now. And so we can be grateful for the freedom that we have in California, that we don't have to like hide out like maybe we did back in the 70s. We don't have to teach our kids how to hide under the bed when somebody from the government shows up to talk about homeschooling. And we don't have to here in California hide out because we're afraid somebody's going to come and wipe out our homeschool communities because of differences of religious beliefs, and so we can be grateful for that. So in terms of specifics, we do know that there is a push for the Make Homeschool Safe Act. And the Make Homeschool Safe Act is the proposed legislation that has been presented to probably all states in terms of a proposed model bill. It's about a 25-page bill that presents different options for how homeschooling can be more regulated. And by more regulated, I mean a lot more regulated. It would be, there's all kinds of ways that you could go about doing it, but the Make Homeschool Safe Act could be implemented in part or in full. And parts of it include parents having to apply to homeschool if they want to be able to do that. So you don't get to just decide to do it. You have to, apply and get permission. Teacher certifications could be required as part of that. Curriculum standards, mandatory testing, all of those things. The big picture of the Make Homeschool Safe Act is that it puts government in the driver's seat as number one responsible entity over children. And parents are not responsible for children, for their safety, for their education, for any of that. That's the government's job. The parents become sort of assistants to the government or stewards of the government's agenda. And so it's not a biblical perspective on child rearing or education. And so it's not a good direction. It's not a safe act. It's a make homeschooling more controlled act is really what it is. And so we're seeing parts of that implemented throughout the country, or we're seeing parts of it. We've seen parts of it introduced as laws in at least 5 other states, and we've seen some states adopt portions of it. And so right now they're fighting it, I think, in New Jersey. We've seen some parts of it adopted in Virginia. We've seen different things being proposed and then halted and on hold in different legislatures right now. So we could see it pass in multiple states in the coming year, but we could also see it introduced here in California. And I expect it'll be introduced in California at some point. It's proposed by the same group that introduced our bills in 2018 to mandate teacher credentialing, mandatory testing, curriculum standards, health and safety standards for homeschoolers back in 2018. So it's the same group. So they've been here before, and they will probably be back. We have a good portion of the state's population of young people, school-age children in our state. So we can expect that there will be some version of that coming back to California in another attempt. So we can expect to need to fight against that. There are also going to be attempts to do other things like push an anti-biblical agenda and view of family and gender on private education. I expect that will come this year, particularly because one legislator, Mr. Mark Gonzalez, who ran the bill on ID cards, said that he was going to push for it to be added to homeschoolers and private schoolers, because those kids are just, he said, more sheltered. And so they need this more than anyone. They need to have an open mind on the gender issues. And so I expect we'll see more challenges from that camp as well. So a number of concerns moving forward, but I think I have hope that we will continue to have victories, but we don't have victories by sitting on our hands and doing nothing either. So we have to remain vigilant, and we have to remember what Reagan said about freedom. It's not just pass to the next generation in the bloodstream. We have to fight for that freedom each year, each generation for sure. But I think it's each year we have to fight for freedom, for homeschooling, for parental rights, for just the way of life that we as Americans love, but we as Christians seek to live out our faith. And we would like to be able to do that without having to go against the government. And so that's something that we have to continue to fight for if we want to maintain those freedoms. So I think that we'll see challenges this year, and there will be opportunities to get involved civically to work to protect our freedoms.
So what big event is going to be coming up in January that homeschoolers can get involved in and get that feeling of camaraderie and learn how all of this works? What's happening in January?
That's such a great question. I'm so glad you asked. In January is our Capital Day. It's a great opportunity for families together to get to come to the Capitol, to get together with other homeschool families, and to present homeschool information to legislators. And what we do at Capital Day is we do some training. We talk about how to visit with your legislator. We equip everyone with packets of information about how homeschooling works in California. And we send them out, and they deliver packets to every legislator's office in Sacramento here at the Capitol. And so all 120 offices get visited by a real live homeschool family, so that legislators and their staff can see homeschoolers face to face and see that we're real people. We're people that are, we're not crazies, and we can contribute to society, and our kids are functional and our families are functional. We can actually contribute to society. And I think that it is, from my perspective, an excellent opportunity for young people to learn about government and to engage with their government system here in California. But it's also a really good opportunity for legislators to hear from homeschool families, to learn a little bit more about homeschooling, and to be to have their concerns laid to rest, because a lot of them, as soon as they see a homeschool family, they sort of relax their concerns and fears about homeschooling, because they have these preconceived notions that homeschoolers don't know anything, they can't do anything, they can't hardly talk. And as soon as those kids get in there and they start communicating with adults, it's a major icebreaker for staffers, for legislators, to see that homeschool families can communicate to each other and to legislators, to the staff there. They can be professional. Kids can talk with adults. They can have conversations about education, about legislation, about government, about what they like to do at home, all kinds of things. And it's an incredible opportunity for the families and for the children, but it's also a really important opportunity for legislators to learn about homeschooling and to have their fears assuaged, and for them to really have a better idea of homeschooling and have a picture in their mind when something comes up, some issue comes up, some homeschool specific bill comes up, and they have a picture in their mind already of a homeschool family that they met, that is somebody that they can fight for, go to bat for, and not just think of homeschoolers as a microscopic number of families that are out rogue doing their own thing that they need to clamp down on. And so I think it's an excellent opportunity for both legislators and families. And it's also fun.
I'm looking forward to it. I look forward to it every year. It's the highlight of January, something to look forward to after the holidays. Yes. So if people want more information about Capital Day or more information about Family Protection Ministries, how can they find you?
Well, our website is fpmca.org, fpmca.org. And there's information there about Capital Day and about helping with getting active in legislation. We have information there about praying for your legislators and for our work. And there's information about donating to FPM to keep us going as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Any last words, any final thoughts you want to share?
I would just say that for homeschool families that are maybe on the fence about getting active in legislation or writing their legislator, visiting, our legislators, they're busy people, but they are just that, they're people. And for people concerned about whether it's too scary to go visit a legislator's office or to come to the Capitol, legislators and their staff, all of these people they're people. They are people that are curious. They love relationships with other people, and ultimately they need Christ just as much as you and I. So they need us to be loving to them. And when we do that reaching out, they're not, every once in a while somebody has a bad experience with a legislator. A politician can sometimes be frustrating, but for the most part, especially at Capitol Day, legislators and their staff are constantly, no matter what party they're with, they are constantly telling us how much they enjoy visits from the families that come to Capitol Day. And they love having the kids especially visit them. And so I would just encourage you to remember that God put you in this time, in this place with your family. And if this is an opportunity that you can take advantage of, then join us for Capitol Day. Bring your family. Your kids will learn so many things, and you'll be taking an active role in protecting the freedom that you use every single day.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Nathan, thank you so much for taking the time to share your heart and expertise with our CHEA community today. Your 23 years of faithful work defending homeschool freedom in California is truly inspiring, and we're grateful for the partnership between Family Protection Ministries and CHEA. For our listeners who want to learn more about Family Protection Ministries and stay updated on legislative developments, you can visit their website at fpmca.org. There you'll find information about upcoming legislation and ways to get involved. If you're interested in attending Capitol Day in January, you will find that information as well. The FPM website has all the details about Capitol Day, registration information, and resources to help you get prepared for the legislative session. If you want to connect with CHEA, head over to our website at cheaofca.org. Here you will find all the information you need to get started on your homeschool journey. Remember, the freedom to homeschool your children according to your Christian convictions is not guaranteed. It requires vigilance, prayer, and action. We encourage you to stay informed, reach out to your legislators, and join us in defending liberty for California's homeschooling families. Thank you for listening to CHEA's California Homeschool Podcast. We'll be back next month with more conversations to help you navigate homeschooling, strengthen your family, and engage in the important work of advocacy. Until then, blessings to you and your family.
Brought to you by thepodcastupload.com, empowering faith-driven voices.